Today's recipe is truly a classic dessert. It dates back all the way to the 17th century. The dish has become a holiday classic for many families. And here to share a recipe in the ciKitchen with us, Natalie Kenny Marquez and her Family to Table blog. This is your great-grandma's recipes that have been passed down generation to generation, and we're lucky enough to have you share them with us.
Yes, and this one is one that was really intimidating for me. And
if you're intimidated by it, I'm intimidated by it. There are lots of things on this table.
Steamed pudding sound like something I could really mess up. And I had to do a little bit of reading about it to learn more about it. And some of you might be really familiar with it out there. But basically,
first of all, it's not pudding.
It's cake. And
this is very confusing to me.
If you're familiar with the Christmas song where they sing about "Come bring us some figgy pudding,"
right.
I thought, what? And so that dates back to 17th century.
Okay.
The figgy pudding and steamed pudding. This has no figs in it. Actually, figgy pudding doesn't really either. It has some dried fruit, and then it's soaked in brandy or something like that. No alcohol, no fruit in this, just a lot of chocolate.
For the life of me, I can't understand why we would name something figgy pudding that has neither figs nor is it pudding. But they decided to do it, and
right.
And
so
we're
I
left with
thought,
the results.
Christmas in July, I didn't have to turn my oven on to make a really awesome cake.
Really? Okay. Well, you're going to have to explain how we do this because there's lots of pans on this table, and that's a bit intimidating for me.
So we have some flour and baking powder, if you can sift that here.
Well, I think I can. I just turn the handle, right?
Yep. And then in here I have some butter and some sugar that we'll mix together.
We're being efficient.
We are being efficient.
And
we're going to give that a quick mix.
I always feel like this doesn't do as much as maybe I thought it would, but
you're doing a great job.
Okay.
Then to the sugar.
Just to keep me busy, I promise you. You can't screw that up.
That's why I took the mixing.
I don't blame you one bit.
Then we add the eggs to the butter and to the sugar. We'll add the milk to that too. And it's whole milk that it calls for, so eggs, butter, sugar over here.
So far, this seems fairly simple in terms of the ingredients and how we're mixing them. I'm guessing maybe some of these bigger pans are where the difficulty jumps in?
Yep, so we'll add the flour to this.
Okay. Oh.
Perfect.
Just all at once.
And then the last step is to add melted chocolate. So I made a little makeshift double broiler to melt the chocolate in here. And then after we combine it all together, we put it in this very special steamed pudding mold.
Yeah, tell me about this. It kind of looks like Oscar the Grouch's trash can from Sesame Street with the lid and everything. But what is it?
Well, you add some chocolate in there. So this is a really special mold just for steamed pudding. It looks like a little bundt, well, a deep bundt, and it has a lid that pops on it. And you put the cake batter in there, and then you submerge it into a pot of boiling water. You don't want the whole thing to touch the bottom, so I have a little grate in the bottom. And we'll fill this up with water about halfway full, and then it cooks for about an hour. You don't want it to be a full rolling boil, so I would bring it back to maybe a simmer after that. But that's how you make
I would imagine
pudding.
A lot of people don't have one of these. However, we have learned that you can get one from Amazon Prime rather quickly.
In about 24 hours. Not that I needed to do that by any means.
Yesterday.
But I was reading, you know, when they made this during the 30s, which is where this specific recipe from my great-great-grandma came from, they would use all sorts of metal containers to make the same thing, whether it was like a baking powder tin or an old coffee tin, something that they could put a cover on so that no moisture would get into it. But this is the ultimate way to put it in there.
So it just snaps down and allows you to set it in there without water sort of seeping through the top or making it too. And then you said it's an hour and it's just sitting on a stovetop. There's no baking involved.
No baking involved. It steam cooks itself. I would check it about halfway through just to make sure your water level hasn't gone down, because this actually is our family's tamale pot, and we've made tamales before and ran out of water, and it was bad news for the pot.
I bet. It was,
That pot was retired, and we had to get a new one.
So you don't put a lid on it, you just sort of let it come to a boil and let it sit there? And
I do put the lid on the big pot.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And then how do you check this? Do you have to actually take the lid off of this, or you just need to make sure the water level's okay?
I checked it at an hour the first time I did it, and it needed a few more minutes, but I think it's because my low went too low, and it wasn't hot enough. So you just put it in there, would fill it up with water.
And an hour later?
You have steamed pudding.
I found it interesting, by the way. We were talking beforehand. You said when you first made this, the amount of chocolate was a bit of a confusion because of the way they sort of dissected chocolate bars and the way we do today.
Great-great-grandma Nellie said 4 squares of chocolate, and so for me, I took 4 squares from the bar, melted it, and put it in there. And my husband and I got it out, and it was very light. Like, wow,
chocolate-ish.
So we found out that actually a square means 1 ounce of chocolate.
Oh, okay.
So I went back on the blog and I made a note to make sure that folks didn't make that same mistake that we did.
I look forward to trying this. I'm fairly certain I've never had anything quite like it. So we're going to sort of speed this process along, and we'll check out how it all came out. We're at the very end of ciLiving today. All the details, including the recipe and a link to Natalie's blog, can be found at our website, which is ciLiving.tv. Now,